Okay, well, thank you everybody for making the time to join us this morning to talk about a very exciting topic. Home inspector regulations, which hopefully you are aware are coming into place in October, but we wanted to give you an opportunity to go through those in this setting with a representative from the Massachusetts Association of Realtors and get some initial questions answered. We will continue discussing this topic throughout the summer, but wanted to start now. For those of you I haven't met before, hi, I'm Betsy Hanson. I'm the CEO at the Cape Cod and Islands Association of Realtors. I'm very pleased to be here for my first Zoomed In on real estate. First of many we will be having. I wanted to kick off this morning with a little bit of housekeeping, just so everyone's aware of some of the upcoming events we have in stock here at the association. We have a reminder that on-demand classes are always available in our Pearl system that's accessible on our website. We also have some upcoming classes this summer that are virtual continuing education. In July on the 24th, we have brokerage liability. In October on the 5th, we have Title V. And then we also have some upcoming MLS trainings, and it's a busy week for those. So tomorrow we have training on Kubicasa. If you aren't familiar with that software already, it's about it's your floor plan tool that's provided for you through the MLS. It's one of our preferred providers. They are free, they're very easy. If you aren't yet familiar with that software, I would highly recommend engaging with that. We also have Remind Docs training on Wednesday. So we have Tuesday and Wednesday. You can register for those courses online. Any of these courses, if you have any trouble getting into them, and if any trouble registering, please contact us and a member of the team will be happy to help. Upcoming events, we do have our summer soiree and awards night that takes place this Thursday. We do have very limited tickets left. So if you are interested in joining us, I would highly encourage that you go ahead and register right away so that you can get one of those last few tickets. That's at 5:30 in Harwich at the Witchmere Beach Club. And we really look forward to seeing you there, and I would hope to meet you in person if I haven't yet already. We wanted to thank our sponsor, the Cooperative Bank of Cape Cod. I think that we have Charlotte with us. Let me find out if she is available to.
She is.
Great. Thank you. Hi, Charlotte. So please welcome Charlotte Green. She's here from the Cooperative Bank of Cape Cod to chat a little bit about their housing program options that we have moving forward. Take it away, Charlotte.
Right. Thank you for having me today, and thank you all for being here. Just going to share my screen quickly. Wanted to talk about some housing affordability and programs we're putting forward to just help everybody get into homes a little bit more quickly and easily in this tough market right now. I'm not sure. I think it's looking for me to turn over my screen, but I'm happy to just speak to things
You should have
off
that
the cusp as
capability
well.
now.
All right, beautiful. Thank you. It's always a trick. So we are here for your buyers, and we're doing that in a couple of ways. We know affordability has been an issue on the Cape for people in all price ranges. So we focus first. I just want to go quickly over some primary residence buyer offerings we have. As a portfolio lender, we've developed some really great programs for first-time home buyers, Cape and Islands residents, and people relocating to work for a Cape Cod-based employer, and our hometown heroes, all within our portfolio, which are offering down payments as low as 1% with some reduced mortgage insurance. We've been really excited to couple those with some down payment assistance grants. We've put around $200,000 back into the community so far this year with down payment assistance. So we're really excited about that and helping with affordability there. Our portfolio programs also offer some really great discounted interest rates for buyers and expanded qualifying parameters with those portfolio programs. We also offer all those popular Fannie, Freddie, FHA-backed first-time home buyer loans as well, but I really wanted to focus on what we're finding to be a really popular niche in the market. Also have some great portfolio opportunities for people in the higher price range outside of that more first-time home buyer targeted market. We've got those portfolio lendings options to beat the pricing add-ons for second homes, which have really been difficult for second home buyers over the past couple of years. We're also running a jumbo purchase special that has gotten some people maybe off the edge, not waiting so long for the rates to drop down, getting into some lower rates today with some adjustable or fixed rate options there in the jumbo market. And we've seen a lot of people using home equity lines of credit to help finance cash purchases or fund their down payments. So that's something that you guys might want to think about us for, as well as all of these other fabulous options we're offering. Just a reminder, our team is always here and ready for a quick close, ready to answer any of your questions. We are not your 9 to 5 mortgage bankers. We're here doing open houses on the weekends, pre-approvals, and answering questions from our agents and buyers at all hours of the day. We are supported by a local team, and we're always looking for solutions to help our buyers. Just want to introduce you all to the sales team. I am the sales manager here over at the Cooperative Bank of Cape Cod, and this is our feet on the street team working with our buyers and our customers. And I know many of you may have seen Matt doing some new member orientation. We've got a team spread out across the Cape and beyond to help you and your buyers. So I'll drop the contact info in the chat. Please reach out to myself or anyone on the team if you'd like to learn more. And I'm looking forward to learning a little bit more about your upcoming home inspection regulations. And I was asked to keep it short today, so that is it.
Thank you. You did just that, Charlotte. That was great. We really appreciate it. Thank you for joining us, and thank you again to the Cooperative Bank of Cape Cod for your sponsorship.
Thank you.
Okay, with that, we're going to get into our program. I'd like to welcome Greg Kiely, who is going to moderate our session today. Greg, I'm sure is no stranger to all of you, is here as a member of the Massachusetts Association of Realtors Government Affairs Committee, and we are very pleased to have him. Just as housekeeping, while Greg is chatting with Coleman, who's our presenter, we'd love for you to use the Q&A button to ask any questions you have. We'll be monitoring that on the back end. We'll interrupt Greg if there's anything that comes through that we think needs it, or we're going to hold some of the things till the end. If for any reason we don't get to one of your questions, we will make sure that a team member reaches out to you directly so that all of the questions are answered. With that, I'd like to say thanks to Greg and take it away.
Great. Thank you, Betsy. Thank you, Charlotte. And welcome, Coleman. For those who don't know, we have a public policy committee here at CCIOR, but then also at the state level, there is a government affairs committee, and Lisa Parento and I have the honor of having been on this for a number of years. And this is something, unfortunately, we've seen coming for a couple of months. So we're very honored to have Coleman, who is leading our efforts at MAR, here with us. Coleman's been a lobbyist and in government affairs and public affairs for about 10 years now, and he's been with MAR almost for a full year. And Coleman is definitely the one we rely on at MAR to guide us through this topic, which has changed pretty dramatically in the past couple of weeks. So Coleman, thank you for giving us your time, and I'm excited to hear the latest updates because I know it's changed since we last met. So welcome, Coleman.
Awesome. Thank you, Greg. Super excited to be here with everybody today. I have some slides, so let me pull those up or share my screen. Awesome. So yeah, I can dive straight in. Like Greg said, I'm Coleman Lynds. I'm MAR's Government Affairs Manager, and we are kind of really excited to be going through all this. So starting it off, I do want to share, in addition to, our partnership with local associations and, like this webinar today, we are doing a virtual town hall tomorrow. So that is on the website, marealtor.com, under our events section. You can, take a picture of this, search it later, register, share it with anyone you know who might not be here today and doesn't want to wait for the recording to come out, or if you want to see these slides again, but just done by Justin. So diving straight in, the key parts of this law is this is importantly, a buyer's right to have a property inspected. It is not a mandatory home inspection, so I just kind of want to make that one clear from the start. And then this is also going to now require a seller disclosure. So I'll go into these points a little bit more, but those are the main, the really big take homes. It is not a mandatory inspection. It's a buyer's right to have a property inspected and the sharing of a required seller disclosure. How did we get here? This has been kind of a long road that we've been going through. So it all kind of started, market trends, and the perception that buyers were taking unnecessary risks. This is, coming out of COVID. This was a proposal that was led by the home inspector industry in Massachusetts. So it's something we've been, keeping an eye on and being engaged on. And then I'm sure, as most of you know, there was the single largest investment in Massachusetts housing industry last session was passed, the Affordable Homes Act. Part of that, there was a more harmful version of this was originally adopted or originally filed and proposed in the Senate. We, fought back pretty hard on it, and we had thought we had gotten it out of it. But as most politics can be, there was a little bit of a lack of transparency and very late night negotiations. This proposal came in at the very, the 11th hour. So the final language that kind of came through, and the buyer's right to a home inspection was included in this omnibus bill that, $5.2 billion, over 100 policy changes. So very large bill. It did many great things. This was not one of those great things. And then looking at the regulatory history, so this was passed in August of last year, so almost a year ago. It was supposed to go into effect December 15th, 2024. We met with the Executive Office of Housing Livable Communities straight away and laid out all of our issues with the bill and all of the pitfalls that we expected that they were going to have in promulgating these regulations. And they agreed with us. So we worked with the Executive Office and the legislature to get the implementation date pushed back to June 15th, 2025. We then worked with the Executive Office, frequently and often throughout the regulatory drafting process. We had, early meetings with them. We had, meetings with them, right before the regulations came out. They sent us an advanced copy of the regulations. And then we ultimately, worked with our government affairs committee at the state level, with the local associations and our members to submit a 6-page public comment. We also worked to get other, industry partners on board with this. So the Real Estate Bar Association, the builders and contractors, the apartment owners associations, the Greater Boston Board of Real Estate. So we all went in together. They followed our lead and signed on to our letter. And we ended up being pretty successful in the changes we were able to get made. The biggest one being that the full implementation of this, so this does not affect any sale or transfer of property before October 15th of this year. So originally it was going to be June 15th, then they proposed July 15th, and we've gotten to push back to October. So that's kind of how we got to this point. The key things for realtors to know about is that this law requires a disclosure from the seller to potential buyers, notifying them of their right to have the home inspected. The law requires that a seller cannot accept an offer based on the buyer waiving the right to have a home inspection. If they're told that either directly or indirectly, they won't be able to accept that offer. So the disclosure after an offer is accepted is, laying that out. And I'll go through the disclosure a little bit more. Failure to, not share the disclosure is a violation of the MA Consumer Protection Law, also known as Chapter 93A. This is one of the bigger changes we worked on getting fixed, was the liability portion of this. Originally, the seller's agent was liable for everything. So they were liable for if their client chose to go with an offer that was waiving inspection, even if they told them that they couldn't do that, or, it was much more broad. So we worked with them to have it limited strictly to, the agent not sharing the disclosure. This disclosure is going to be drafted by the state, and it's going to be a standalone form. This is something that the state is still working on, and we're, glad they pushed it back to October 15th because we aren't expecting this in the, too short term. But with that being said, we know what the language of the disclosure is. We just don't have that form yet from the state. And this is something that must be completed prior to executing a contract to purchase and be signed by both the buyer and the seller. So this is the first thing you're going to have to share with accepting an offer. So the disclosure, working our way through it. The first point that instead of throwing, it's, a pretty lengthy disclosure. So I'm just going to kind of go through the key parts of it. So a seller warrants and represents that the agreement to purchase is not contingent upon waiver, limitation, or restriction of a buyer's choice to obtain a home inspection in whole or part. The seller agrees and acknowledges that a buyer may choose to have the premise inspected by a licensed home inspector of the buyer's choice. And the buyer shall have a reasonable period of time after acceptance to decide whether to proceed with that transaction if the results of the inspection are not satisfactory to the buyer. So the key points here is, the agreement to purchase is not contingent upon the waiver, limitation, or restriction. The buyer may choose to have the premises inspected. And one of the key things that we worked on is the reasonable period after after the acceptance of an offer. In the original draft of the regulations, they had no time frame for when the inspection needed to happen, and then gave the buyers 10 days after the inspection to choose whether or not they wanted to move forward. That kind of goes against industry norms, and we, feared it was going to, prolong the closing process. So we pushed for kind of a similar 10-day requirement that the lead disclosure has. In the end, the executive office kind of gave us that flexibility to just have a reasonable time period. So what is reasonable? That's kind of going to be open to interpretation. I would say, minutes after the acceptance of an offer will not be considered reasonable, but you can still have a short time window for when, in an offer that you can accept that an inspection can take place. So the market's going to have to kind of figure out what reasonable is, but kind of, be smart on that. Some additional details. So this applies to all residential purchases of 1 to 4 units. It includes condos. So even if the building is larger than 4 units, if you're just selling, 1 unit, or if it's a multifamily with 4 or under units, this is going to apply to it. The time period to conduct and decide is negotiable between the buyer and seller. Like I said, it just needs to be reasonable. The buyer does not have to conduct an inspection. They shouldn't put that on the offer, but after the acceptance of the offer, the buyer can waive the right to an inspection. So that is also something we got clarification on, from the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, is, when in this process can it be decided that the buyer does not want to do their home inspection. So it's, as soon as the offer is accepted, without knowledge, as soon as the offer is accepted with the assumption that an inspection will take place, once that offer is accepted, the buyer can waive the right and you can move forward with your closing process, a bit quicker. And then, importantly, this law does not change what a home inspection is or what home inspectors are regulated by. So home inspection, as previously defined and, still defined, is, one that is conducted by a licensed home inspector and includes roofing, exterior, structure, electrical, plumbing, heating, cooling, general interior condition, and insulation. It's not going to be any more strict about, what home inspectors are supposed to be doing. They're not going to be, able to, just, break anything or destruct property, go into walls, open up walls, or anything like that. So what a home inspection is stays the same. It's just the buyer's right to have the home inspected. There are 4 exclusions to this law. So the first one is new construction, where the contract is entered into prior to substantial completion. It includes a warranty. This is something that MAR lobbied for with the executive office to include this as a exception. Sales to relatives and as part of divorce proceedings, we also got this expanded. What a relative was a bit more restrictive in the initial draft of the regulations, and we got some clarification and expansion on that. It is excluded for estate planning purposes and foreclosure transfers. So what is not allowed to be done additionally is anything that would render a home inspection meaningless. That, whether that's in the offer that you're accepting, or, in your negotiations. So unreasonably limiting the prospective purchaser's ability to schedule, receive, and review a home for inspection is not allowed, and neither is prohibiting a prospective purchaser from choosing not to proceed with the transaction if the results of the home inspection are not satisfactory to the prospective purchaser. So this is some things to keep an eye out for as, offers are, come in and when you're doing your negotiations with, prospective purchasers. But with that being said, what is allowed is a seller and prospective purchaser may agree to limit a proposed purchaser's choice to not proceed with the transaction after a home inspection if the estimated aggregate cost of repairs do not exceed a reasonable monetary threshold agreed to by the parties, or reasonably limit the prospective purchaser's deposit refund if the prospective purchaser chooses not to proceed with the transaction. So these are two items that we got clarification on from the executive office. So, allowing some more flexibility in there and, for there to be some negotiation in the home purchase process. And importantly, and this is the last slide I'll share before we can jump into questions, is MAR forms updates are coming soon. So even though this is going to be a standalone disclosure form from the state, we are going to be updating our contract of purchase inspection clause, our purchase and sale agreement, and looking at any potential new forms we need to have in there. MAR's Forms Advisory Committee is meeting this week on the 26th, so we should have some more information to share on that in the coming weeks. But importantly, this will be something that we will be baking in at, all steps in the process, because we do want to make sure that our members are, not going to be tripped up by this or forget to share disclosure. So we're going to make it as, effective and easy as possible for the implementation of this. So we can, jump into questions. My contact information's on the screen. Feel free to reach out to me if you ever, have any additional questions on this. And MAR also has a legal hotline for all of our members. So if you have a question that's a bit more timely, feel free to reach out to them Monday through Friday, 9 to 4 p.m. With that, I'll stop sharing.
All right, Coleman, thank you so much. So just a reminder, everybody, we're seeing a few things in the chat. We're seeing a few things, people with hands raised. But if you could go and click on the Q&A button, you might need to make your Zoom window a little bit bigger. But if you click on the Q&A button, a window will appear and you can type your questions in there. So Coleman, just a few things while people start typing in their questions, just to go back and clarify. This is all residential, but not commercial properties. And it's any purchase that is 1 to 4 units. So if it's like 100-unit condo building, if you're buying one of the condos, this still applies, correct? And then the carve-outs, divorce, family transfers, estate planning, new construction, and foreclosures. Are there any other big takeaways, or how do you feel this has moved kind of in the direction that we've been working towards at Government Affairs since its previous draft?
Yeah, so those are some of the big takeaways are these possible exclusions. So new construction was not even in the original draft of this, the regulations. That's something that the home builders, we discussed with them and we agreed with. Most new homes being built are, they go through rigorous permitting and inspection processes already. And more often than not, they come with at least a 1-year warranty on those new purchases. So the executive office agreed with us and the home builders on that this should be something that's excluded. You should be able to move forward, purchasing that new built home without an additional inspection. And then sales to relatives is a big one. And, the point you made, this is, 1 to 4 unit residential properties. So if it's a multifamily with 4 or under units, you have to, apply by this law. But if it's 5 or more, that is excluded from it. And, to your second half of that question about, how has this changed? The Executive Office of Housing Livable Communities was given a very hard task with this. The way the law was drafted, while was better than the original proposal, was still incredibly broad and very vague, and it put the entire burden on the sellers and the seller's agent. And it just tasked the executive office with, coming up with the regulations. It had no, real guidance within the law on how this was supposed to be implemented or who was going to, regulate it or whatnot. So, we're very, happy that we have a great relationship with the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, and they, really look to us to be the experts on this topic. So we were able to, we, guided this as, to this point to our best of our abilities. And, it was, the original draft was, we wanted a disclosure-based approach. We still had, quite a few concerns with the way that they originally drafted. But in the end, we're, satisfied to an extent with, this final version.
And just on that and some of the exemptions, you know, you talked a little bit about how the word reasonable keeps on being used, a reasonable time frame or reasonable deposit or reasonable negotiation. As far as we are aware, or as far as you've seen or anyone's evaluated, this doesn't prohibit a buyer from attempting to negotiate or a seller attempting to negotiate to keep a transaction moving forward. This is more just about the availability or the option to inspect, protecting that for the buyer, correct?
Exactly. Yeah, it is. Reasonable is a tricky and vague term. Lawyers love it. I'm not a lawyer myself, but it leaves the door open for certain things. So you are able to include in an offer and accept in an offer that says, I'm going to have the home inspected, but if the repairs are less than $10,000, I'm going to move forward with it. You're able to say, I, want the home inspected, but if I choose to not move forward after the inspection, like, you can keep my deposit. And it's also, going to depend, a deposit on a, $300,000 house. If it's $1,000, that is something that can be left behind. If it's a, $20,000 deposit on a $300,000 house, that might be less reasonable. If we're looking at a $4 million house, that $20,000 might look a little bit different. So it's going to be, up to kind of, being smart with, what is reasonable. And then again, determining a time period on, when the home inspection can happen. Like I said, an offer that says, we'll have our house inspected within, 5 minutes of accepting an offer, that's pretty limiting. That's to be viewed as an impossible scenario. But we're going to do it within, like, if we wanted to do an inspection, it'd be within 10 days, 5 days. That's something that's viewed more reasonable, and that's an offer that could be accepted.
So we're seeing a few questions that are kind of congregating around the same area. And I think the slide in which you talked about the licensed home inspector needing to be included in this language, that just reserves, if I'm correct, the right for the buyer to bring in a licensed home inspector. If they choose not to, or if they choose to do an inspection of another form, this was more around creating a situation that the seller couldn't block, right? So the seller couldn't block an inspection, but the buyer could bring in a contractor or a friend or an expert of their own if that's who they choose to bring in. This just says that the seller can't prohibit them from bringing in a licensed home inspector if that's what they choose to do, correct?
Correct. Yeah. And it is, yeah, again, it's aimed at, license a home inspection that, as defined by, the Office of Consumer Protection and Professional Licensure, and what is a, to bring in a licensed inspector. It doesn't, say that you can't have try to negotiate any other form of inspection. It's just that you just can't accept that offer at the outset. The seller and the seller's agent can't accept an offer that says, I am not having a home inspection done. That is not allowed. But putting in an offer, doing any of these reasonable negotiations, whether it's, how much of the total dollar amount that you're willing to forego on inspections, a deposit, that you're willing to forego or a time frame. Those are things that can be included in an offer and can be negotiated on. But even then, still, as soon as the offer is accepted and the disclosure is shared and signed by both parties, the buyer or prospective buyer can just they can say, I'm not going to get this home inspected. Let's move this forward.
And to that, just one more question in this kind of category. If a buyer chooses not to have an inspection, they're allowed to do that, correct? It's just, again, the seller cannot make that a request or requirement of the offer that the seller accepts, correct?
Correct. As long as the offer is accepted and it is not accepted on the, the basis that the buyer is going to waive the right to a home inspection. As long as that, the seller accepts an offer such as that, and then, it's going to be the seller accepts an offer before they sign a contract or anything. The first thing the seller and the seller's agent are going to share is the disclosure with the prospective buyer. Both parties have to sign that in addition, and then the contract, purchase to sale, or whatever the next contract is in the process you want to use. As soon as the disclosure and the offer are accepted, the buyer can say, I'm not going to get this done. I'm waiving my right to this. Yeah.
So we're starting to get a few questions about the sequence of events. So we'll get to those in just a second. But can we just go back in 1 second? When we talked about the exemptions, right, which types or groups of properties, can you just clarify, as far as we know at this moment, the estate exemption and what might that cover, what that might that not cover, and how do we see that at this point?
Yeah, so it was largely aimed at, continuing to be, a family related thing. So still going to be kind of to kind of see that, but it's largely going to be. I'd have to come back to that one. That one's still a little foggy on what exactly that is going to be.
Yeah, and for sure, I mean, I think for those who haven't been viewing this step by step since last fall, there have been a lot of questions that have come up in forums like this or in our government affairs committee meeting, in which you and Justin and the team at MAR have said, okay, we have a great relationship with a point of contact. We're going to go get this clarified or modified. I think one of the things we haven't given you enough credit yet in this, if everyone on this webinar had seen the first version, it was a lot more scary than what Coleman just went through with us. So we've seen progress in this, and maybe Coleman, in the end, you can talk about, what the days up until October might look like. But we do have a grouping of questions that are about this disclosure, right? And we know that there are a number of disclosures or forms that are customarily done at different points in the transaction. So you had said that this disclosure should be signed at the contract to purchase. Can you just go through that again, the timing of that, who signs it, who's it come from or go to, and what is this disclosure meant to codify in the timeline of the transaction?
Yeah, so this is going to be the sharing of and signing of this disclosure is going to be, the first formal step in the purchase process. So before or at the signing of the purchase to contract, the seller or the seller's agent must provide this separate disclosure. We had originally, asked if this could just be part of, an offer or the purchase to sale or the purchase to contract. If we could like bake it into the form and it's, as you're going through, signing and initially things that could be part of that. They do want it to be its standalone form. So it'll be similar to kind of lead disclosure, but a little earlier in the process. So it's going to be, offers are accepted, the seller and the seller's agent will review them. And then before or at the signing of the first purchase to contract, whatever that may be, and there are a few options in terms of what you want that first purchase to contract to be. That's when the disclosure will get shared. And we'll do, once we get the final form, once we get our forms worked out, we'll continue to kind of do education on what exactly that looks like, particularly as we get closer to October.
And I'm starting to see the reactions that many of us have had as we've kind of lived through this over the past few months. But again, just clarify, because there are two questions that have just come up. The seller is not allowed to accept an offer that does not contain a home inspection contingency. Yes, no.
We are going to figure out what the home inspection contingency looks like. So that'll be something that's going to be discussed in the forms committee.
Okay. And a buyer can try to waive or cannot try to waive, especially with homes that, one of the things I know we talked a lot about at MAR Government Affairs is homes that are barely livable or barely habitable. Is there going to be any mechanism for a buyer to say, look, I know that this is not a livable unit or a habitable unit, or my plan is to totally renovate this. May I skip the step of doing a home inspection? Where do we stand on that right now?
Yeah, and you cannot, you should not put in your offer that you do not want to have an inspection done because the seller cannot accept that. Obviously, you can attempt to try that, but then if you do get it accepted, the seller's breaking this law and the regulations, and it puts, the real estate agent at risk, and it does put the, seller at risk to lawsuit. If they, if there are parties that feel they're aggrieved of this. So, I mean, there are, like I said, a few ways, you can, make your, the aggregate in which, after an inspection, you would continue with the property, incredibly high if you wanted to show that you're willing to go forward with it. Your deposit, waiving, your right to, get that you're not going to back out, or if you do back out, you lose your deposit. You just can't explicitly say, I will not get this home inspected in your offer.
And again, that's because that then puts the seller, and more specifically for our circumstances, the seller's agent at risk of breaking this new law, right?
Exactly. I think, even if it's the best offer, I think people would be scared to accept it for a risk of, on the real, obviously, the agent does not make the decisions for the seller, but I think the seller's agent will, will hopefully, advocate for them to make the right decision, and then it does open the seller up for a lawsuit.
Now, we know that one of the fundamental truths of Massachusetts property transactions is buyer beware, right? Um, some of the states around us, they are much more disclosure mandatory or disclosure heavy. Was there any talk in the development or the modification of these regulations about leading with property disclosures from the seller instead of maybe restricting this as much as it seems to be right now?
We brought that point up. We don't necessarily advocate for additional seller disclosures, as an association, but, we did, point out that if, we were trying to truly, be open and transparent about it, that would be the route the state should go. But again, this was something that was pushed by home inspectors, and was latched onto by, a few members of the Senate, and they, really tried to run with it. So that is, something that we've pointed out, but that is not the route they decided to go, and we weren't able to change that.
How is this all like who's going to monitor this? How is this going to be enforced? What's the mechanism? Like, say you're a seller, right? Or a seller's agent, and you get all of these offers and they're all well intentioned. And then your seller says, I understand the regulations, you've given me the disclosures, but I want to sign Coleman's offer because Coleman's offer just is the best. But then it has this waiver that's included in it.
Mhm.
Who's the police force? Who's enforcing this? Who's regulating this? Who's checking us on all of this?
So that is, I would say, the grayest area, and that's, I would say, the fault of the way the law was written. So the regulations fall under the, the Executive Office of Housing Livable Communities. They don't really have the setup to closely, police this. So it's going to be honestly like a little different body, but, kind of similar to lead inspected. inspection clause. It's going to be, if, a party feels that something was done to them, if they, feel it was the fault of the real estate agent, they would go to the Board of Registration and they would file a complaint there and it would go through the process there. If they feel it was on the seller side, they would go through legal action, so through lawsuit. But it does not create a specific body or name a specific body that's going to be going out and proactively monitoring and policing this.
And, one of the things that I spend a lot of time doing at MAR is sitting in pro standards hearings and adjudicating those. This is separate from the Realtor Code of Ethics and Professional
Correct.
Standards.
This is not an MAR thing. This will go strictly through the Board of Registration.
And as is properties, right? And the definition of as is always something that's up for interpretation anyway. But, if a property is marketed as is, I believe the advice would be any offer still must give the option, or a seller probably shouldn't accept an offer, or a seller's agent shouldn't allow the acceptance of an offer that waives an inspection in an as is property, even though the buyer might ultimately choose not to inspect in that circumstance, correct?
Correct. Yeah, there's only those 4 places where you are able to not where you're able to say you don't have to go through the disclosure process, and that's new builds, estate planning, family transfers, and divorce.
Right. Now, when we update the forms through the MAR forms committee, right, just as we saw many forms updated almost a year ago for different reasons, will there also be deletion of maybe some forms that conflict with these new regulations, like a waiver of home inspection or other types of things that might be in the forms library?
Yeah, they're going to be reviewing all of them to make sure that everything's in line and people aren't going to be, accidentally using one that they can't use anymore. And we've already reached out. So, obviously there's, MAR's, forms library. We also license to a number of, private entities that use ours. So, we've been in contact with them, letting them know that these changes are in the pipeline and, figuring out what we need to do to get those changed, removed, deleted, in their libraries as well. So yeah, it'll be, we're glad that this is, we have this window. To be fully transparent, we said October 15th in our public comment, and we did not expect to get October 15th. We thought hopefully August would be, a good compromise. But we made, a very good point, to the executive office, MAR and, the other trade industries within real estate, we're the ones best equipped to educate, update, and, get our members ready, whether it's through forums, educational opportunities like this. We're the ones who are going to be able to update and, our members, but MAR, we only represent 1/3 of licensed real estate agents. And we were not confident, and I think the state agreed with us, that the state was going to be able to educate the other 2/3 of licensed real estate members, other attorneys, private parties and sellers about this law. So it's not just us doing this education, but we are, confident that our members will be the most prepared for it. But we are, concerned for, everyone else out there.
Now, there are a few questions, and the questions are starting to slow down. So if you feel like you need something asked that hasn't been asked yet, first come and see Justin's version of this tomorrow as well. But knowing that every brokerage and every broker is going to set their own policy or their own procedure for how things should be handled for the clients they represent, there are just a few questions around kind of the distribution of the disclosure. First of all, is this a disclosure that we see coming from buyer to seller or from seller to buyer? And then if it is coming from seller to buyer, is it possible, or do you think it's appropriate to consider the seller, while they're doing their listing paperwork, filling out their side of the disclosure and distributing it with all the other listing information or disclosures or materials that happen in the showing phase before an offer is presented?
Yeah, so it has to come from the seller to the buyer. Again, we had asked, the executive office if we could put it in our offer letter. So it's, it would just be there from the beginning, and it's something that would get signed and, by the seller, but it needs to come from the seller and go to the buyer. Putting it in the listing and, with all the listing papers is something we are thinking and looking at. We don't have that answer yet, but it is something that we're contemplating because it would be, a guaranteed way to make sure that you're sharing it, timely and as needed.
And so that's maybe not entirely different than kind of the expectations for the lead paint form, correct? That a seller says, this is what I know, this is what I don't know. And before you make an offer, here's what I'm disclosing to you. Just the mechanism might be somewhat similar for this type of disclosure, correct?
Yeah, so it's definitely, something we're strongly considering and, we'll work through. Regardless, we're gonna, make sure it's the best, easiest and most efficient way for sharing it that is legally allowed is the one that we, kind of recommended and share our education on.
So we'll just summarize here in a second, but I know one of the things we're all panicking about is what is reasonable and what is not reasonable, and who are the reasonability police, and how do we measure what reasonable feels like or seems like in a market that's changing rapidly. What role does MAR see themselves playing, or what role do local associations or do we as an industry see ourselves playing when it comes to further adapting this to make it work in the real world?
Yeah, so it's going to be an evolving process and an evolving regulation. We're not going to, explicitly lay out what is reasonable. We still have to, follow antitrust, laws on this. So we're not going to, dictate exactly what the market can bear as reasonable or what the state is. I think reason why we are happy with, having reasonable in there is because we also didn't want to, have this land on the side of being incredibly prescriptive, saying exactly what needs to be done. And, having it be incredibly limiting to the industry, making even larger of a change. So it is going to have to be something that takes, careful consideration and time on, what the market bears, what is kind of seen, what is allowed. And it's definitely going to be a journey and not something that we immediately know our answers on, unfortunately.
Now, we've got a webinar tomorrow, or a town hall tomorrow, correct? But we're sitting here in the end of June, almost July. We've got October. Is this going to become the new driver's license, where it was supposed to go into effect in 2005 and here it is 2025, and the date keeps getting pushed back? Or do you feel like October is October and we should be ready for it?
We're operating under the assumption that October 15th is going to be the drop dead deadline. I think in terms, we have, the final regulations. We have some, still clarification questions that we continue to work with the Executive Office of Housing and Local Communities on getting answered. But we're operating under the belief that, October 15th is when this is going to really start. We'll be ready based on, the information we have. With that said, nothing is permanent, and we are, beginning to think of ways to, whether it's, clarifying the law at the, the statutory level through the legislature, amending, the regulations further in the future. So nothing is permanent, but I wouldn't expect any major changes in the next, 6 months to a year.
Great. And so there are a few more questions about, what should I write in, or what should, like, I think every broker, I think we would advise every broker is going to have to come up with what they're comfortable with for their own brokerage, correct? We don't expect the state association to say, you should write this in, or you should do that. At this point, we're more just getting the disclosures and the mechanism out to everybody, correct?
Yeah, correct. So there will be more information coming out. The first webinar, or educational we did on this was with brokers a couple weeks ago. So I came out on a Friday, and I think on Wednesday we had, a broker town hall. So, we're already working with brokers to try to make sure that they're educated as possible. The next, frontier is, working with all of our members, working with our locals to, spread the word as much as possible. And just, making sure people know the larger concrete facts at this point. But the finite pieces of this, we are happy that we have this time to figure it out and get it ready. We're not going to have to rush to kind of get those answers and make a mistake. So definitely pay attention to the Cape and Islands, to MAR. We have a website up on MAR's website on the new home inspection regulations. We have a quick little FAQ right now. But more information will be coming out on this, rest assured, and there will be more opportunities for clarification. And then, like I said, as we get closer to the October 15th date, and you still have questions, feel free to reach out to myself, the team at the Cape and Islands, or use the MAR legal hotline. You can 9 to 5 Monday through Friday, reach out there.
Yeah, we didn't even plan this, but my next question was going to be about the legal hotline because we know, especially for a community like Cape Cod and the islands, a lot of our sellers or our buyers are used to what happens in other states or their quote unquote home state, right? And 2 clarification points, if you could. This is really on the seller's agent, right? The enforcement is primarily directed towards the seller's agent to make sure this is handled appropriately, correct?
Yeah, the seller's agent, but I mean, buyer's agent need to be, as educated on this as well, because if they're, out there still making offers, waiving home inspections, they're not doing their clients any favor as well.
And then in that, if you are a seller's agent or the broker for a seller's agent, and you just have a seller who says, well, what's all this paperwork? We don't do this where I'm from, all of that, which we've all experienced and happens on a regular basis. The legal hotline is available to us and staffed, and that's a way that we can phone a friend and get some help if we need it.
Yeah, definitely. And please do that. I mean, they're Justin, Kate, and Laura are answering emails and calls every, weekday. We always make the little disclosure that anything you do submit does get forwarded to your brokerage. So just be aware of that. But yeah, email, phone call. You'll get, we are not lawyers for every individual member, but we can provide guidance. And, if it's a question that they can't answer, they will get the answer, whether it's from, the rest of the team or, they'll hunt it down for you.
Then one last question, and if anyone has anything else to put in the Q&A, please, this is your moment to do so before we wrap up. But Massachusetts is a state that heavily involves real estate attorneys in the process. Is there any outreach planned, or is there any effort that we can take part in to reach out to the members of the bar to say, hey, this is what we're going through in this transaction process? Are we on a similar page, much like we did a year ago with some of the other issues that came up in our transactions?
Yeah, so I mean, the Real Estate Bar Association has been a great, partner in this whole thing. We've been, in pretty close lockstep with them. They signed on to our public comment. We've met with them a couple times. We'll meet with them again, sure. They will be doing their own, member education on this. But, kind of like I said, we're confident in the other, industry associations to kind of step up and, be leaders on this. But we'll continue to also, make sure that the state is doing their part as well and reaching out to everyone who might not be active in association like MAR or REBA. And also, for, individuals, I mean, that are entering the market to make sure that they're knowledgeable about this, and it's not, just their real estate agent, informing them of laws that they also know about them.
Great. And so one just clarifying question came up, and I think we'll cap it at this, the definition of new construction. So when you were in your slides earlier, you said there was an exemption for something that's not substantially completed, right? So what if it was an existing home that is in some significant state of reconstruction? Has there been an interpretation, or is there a way to get, well, let's just keep it simple because every question has a what if. Will there be ways, or will MAR help create an FAQ or some guidance on, how some of these reasonability or new construction terms could be answered in best practice?
Yeah, we will definitely provide some on that. And it is truly new construction and it's pre-sale of it. So it's the sale of the house even before the construction is finished. And there has to be at least a 1-year warranty on that new construction. We floated the idea of heavily remodeled homes being excluded, but ultimately we got pushback saying that unless you're tearing it down to the foundation or redoing the foundation, there's something that could potentially be caught or be an issue with an inspection. So that was not included. So it is purely brand new construction, pre-sales, with at least a 1-year warranty, and it has to be prior to substantial completion of that new build.
Great. Well, I mean, Coleman, I know how far this has moved since last fall when it first came on our radar screen. And I know the work that not only you, but Justin, Audrey, Teresa, and her whole team at MAR have kind of done. There are definitely some shocked conversations that we've been in over the hours that we've met as a government affairs committee. And I'm sure there will still be more. But I think it's important that we're getting all of this feedback from everybody today so we can understand what to think of next. Is there anything else from like a 10,000-foot view that you want to summarize before we invite Betsy back in to take us to the next step?
Yeah, no, I think I'll just close by saying, it is as, rough of a transition as this has kind of been, and, as, concerning as the whole process has been, it's been great to see the amount of people that are wanting to get engaged in advocacy after learning about this. So, Massachusetts, we have a 2-year full-time legislative session. It never really stops, and there can be proposals at any time. So, being involved, with the local association and with MAR on government affairs, our state political coordinator program, RPAC, these are all really important ways. And, our ability to influence bad things or, make things and get good things passed, really comes down to our members and our advocacy. And, we are one of the few that cover the entire state, and we have, more members than any other trade association here. So we have the members to do advocacy, and I'm glad to see that people are willing to get more engaged on it and help us.
Well, I know I'm going to be signing up for, well, I've already signed up for tomorrow as well to hear this for the 17th time. But we need it. And then also to everyone, Coleman said forms will be coming from MAR, but I know the brokerages that I've worked with, we had our own version of forms. And so remember, if you use your own version of forms, you might want to take a look at what's coming out from the state or from your own legal counsel and make sure your forms are changed or your brokerage forms are changed to reflect what's going on. But remember, we all always have access to MAR forms through our member benefits. So please don't be shy to use those. And the legal hotline is your friend and your broker is your best friend. So keep those two together. All right, Coleman, you've heard enough from me. Everyone's heard enough from me. So I'm going to turn this back over to you and to Betsy, and thank you on behalf of all of us.
Yeah, happy to.
Great. Well, thank you, Greg. Thank you, Coleman. I think that was great and very helpful for our members. I hope you all found it helpful. We will definitely be in touch throughout the summer with additional information as it's released from MAR and keeping you all in touch. But if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. And thanks everybody for joining us today. Thanks, Coleman.
You're welcome. Bye.